Well, it's day 4 and it's the end of Impulse 1. This is the last day, and it's only a few more chances here for the pack to get a win. Things are very, very, very close here. If we look up north, you can see that Stahlhammer, West Germans, are holding on just barely, even though they're sorely outnumbered, and it looks like they're probably going to fall, but so far they seem to be okay, despite being under a lot of attacks this turn. Down south, I got pretty nervous about the idea of these guys, these Americans, across the bridge here, jumping over and cutting off my line of communication between Eisenbach and the east. So what I've done is I've sent the 87th over here to sort of, as a screen, to sort of prevent that from happening. Down south near Nazabrook, right here, the second ACR has managed to get a little hit in on the second guard's airborne. This is kind of important. If they can take out the city and then head up, then they might be able to just barely cut off communication if they can play it right. This other cavalry unit right here is sitting there, and it's kind of playing havoc with the Soviets. They got to mop it up basically before they can really claim any victory down there. So things are looking a little still very uncertain at this point, but the Soviets are sort of locking things up, and we'll see how their luck holds out over the next couple of impulses. Day 4, Impulse 2, and a lot has happened. First of all, I should mention that from last Impulse, all of the asset chits came into play. NATO was using airstrikes to hit at Soviet units around here in the center of the board, and managed to destroy one of the First Guards tanks that was sitting here at the bridge. It's also been calling in gunships, but unable to get anything effective going with it. The USSR has also been calling in gunships, and they don't seem to be arriving either. However, the Soviets have been using chemical weapons. They've started using those, which means that they're not taking defensive fire. At least they didn't for last impulse. And as a result, they were able to sort of conserve their forces while still making attacks. Defensive fire is basically when you roll a 7 for the pact on your attack, and if you roll a 7 on 2d6, it ends up with your pact unit taking a hit on any attack. So since it's a roll of 7, you got to really be careful. The chemical weapons certainly help mitigate the damage that you typically take when you're a pact player. NATO takes defensive fire as well. If it rolls a 4 on an attack, which is pretty rare, then it's going to take some damage. And it has taken a bit of damage from defensive fire so far. Anyway, to talk more about what's happened in Impulse 2 of Day 4, I guess the big thing would be over up here at Stahlhammer. So looking here, we can see that the West German Armored Battalion is now destroyed. What's happened is there's a Lonely Territorial sitting in there. I don't think it's going to hold out. It's reduced. But what I've got is over west of that, I've got a Territorial here guarding the bridge, trying to stop the Soviets from making a run for it off the west side of the board. And I've got a Territorial unit here sort of trying to prevent the same thing from happening. It looks like I shouldn't have tried to spread myself out so much. I probably should have focused on just keeping those Territorials reinforcing Stahlhammer, but hindsight's 2020. I think it's going to fall, and I think the Soviets are going to get their victory point unless something really interesting happens. Down by Eisenbach, actually down south, just zoom out here so you know where I'm talking about. The Americans made a play for this road. They came over the bridge after hitting the Soviet units there, and we now have a American armored unit that has crossed over to this side, and it's going to try to cut the line of communication going from Eisenbach over to the east. and that'll deny the Soviets a victory point. However, you can see that the Soviets responded to the American incursion on the east side of the board by piling up the 87th Motorized Rifle Division just around it to pin it in there. And that was kind of the theme for the rest of the Soviet turn as well, just pinning in American gains and trying to stop them from capitalizing on their successes earlier in the turn. Down here you can see that the 2nd ACR has moved a unit over the bridge from Nazabrook after taking out the 2nd Guards Airborne Division or battalion in there, and the Soviets have had to rush down some infantry to keep those guys bottled up, to keep them from running onto the roads here and cutting off that line of communication. Same here, we've got a cavalry squadron from, I think, the 5th U.S. Armored Division, and it's also been bottled up by infantry and tanks down here. There's one infantry and there's 2 infantry in Eisenbach. One is reduced and almost gone. There are 2 American units sitting across the bridge. They've tried to make some attacks into Eisenbach, but they've taken defensive fire. They haven't been able to crack the Soviets in their defense of Eisenbach. So the Soviets are looking pretty good here, but there's still 2 impulses left, and we still might see something really surprising. Looking forward to it. Let's check it out. 4 in the end of Impulse 3 now. Some pretty big things have happened here. Well, first of all, just as predicted earlier, Stahlhammer Air Force Base has fallen to the Soviets. Not only did they take out the West German infantry in there, they moved in a few of their own infantry units to defend against any territorial counterattacks. They needn't have worried about that though, because the 1st Guards up here managed to eliminate a territorial armored unit that was sitting around here, so that's cleared. Just to the west of that, there is a territorials unit sitting here protecting the bridge, but it's not really going to be able to do much. It may slow down the Soviet from exiting the board, but it looks like they've got their one victory point from taking Stahlhammer Air Force Base. Down south, some more interesting things happened. The U.S. actually punched over this bridge here in the center of the board. There's an American armored unit and an infantry unit, and they punched a hole right down here, which allowed one of the ACR units, Air Cavalry Regiment units, to sort of get over the bridge and down towards the southeast. Those possibly could end up trying to cut the line of communication. It's pretty iffy, but they do pose a threat, and that last-minute American breakthrough could actually steal the 2nd victory point from the Soviets. Down in Eisenbach, what's happened here? Well, basically, the 2 cavalry units are still pinned in this area here. They're not getting out. They don't seem to be able to muster enough strength to actually punch through in the south. So the only real threat here is the Americans, as I said, up here, that might be able to do something. But hey, who knows? We're going into the last turn, Impulse 4, and then there's a night phase. So there's still a few things that could happen yet. But it looks like the Soviets definitely have 1 victory point from Stahlhammer, and let's see if they can capture their 2nd victory point by the end of the game. Day 4, Impulse 4, closing in on the end of the game here. Pact and NATO both rolled 5 for their activation number, so that means that only a few units could actually move. The ones that could move moved very quickly. Up north, that meant that we had 1 tank unit and a recon unit over here move towards this bridge and try to hit at the territorials across there. Didn't actually do anything. The big surprise this turn actually was the fact that down south here there was a cavalry unit that had crossed the bridge in an earlier impulse, and because it had an activation number of 5, it sped over over here. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, it would have been here instead of 6. Yeah, it sped over right here, and it's sitting on the road going from Eisenbach over to the east, and now it's cut off the Soviet line of communication. So this one unit that's nearly dead has basically managed to slip around the Soviet defenses up around the bridge here, and has effectively cut off line of communication. A Soviet tank battalion raced from the south up here to try to hit at it. It has till tonight to do that, so there's still a one night phase left where some combat may happen. We'll see. It's right down to the wire right now. Literally, we have one unit on the board that is preventing a Soviet win at this point. So the Russians need to clean it up and try to pull this one out. So we'll see what happens in the night. Day 4, end of the night phase, and we're at the end of the game here, and it looks like what happened here was a tragedy for NATO. For the activation rolls, NATO rolled broken orders and got an activation number of 1. Only the Americans could activate, and they couldn't do much. The Pact went first, and they immediately went to cleaning up the single American unit that was cutting off line of communication from Eisenbach. You can see there was in this hex right here that we had a cavalry, 2nd Cavalry unit there, and it was destroyed by infantry and gunships. It was just gone. Or not gun. Sorry, there were no gunships in the night phase, so I guess it was just infantry and tanks that did the job. Once that was taken care of, the Americans really had no other choices. They did move out their 2nd Cav from Nazabrook up towards Eisenbach, but still that doesn't do much. They weren't able to really cause any problems. They couldn't hit out at any... they tried to hit out at some of the Soviet units near Eisenbach, but just couldn't break out at all. So they were stuck. There was nothing that much they can do. There was a territorial, West German territorial unit guarding this bridge, and the Soviets slammed through it, just like a speed bump. They took it out very quickly. They couldn't exit any of their guys off the map, which is a little unfortunate for them. It would have given them 3 victory points, but that's life. As it stands, they get 1 victory point for having Stahlhammer, and we can trace a line of communication from Eisenbach back through to P20 or J20, so that means that the area is clear. That's the 2nd victory point, and it looks like this one narrowly goes to the Soviets. What a terrific game. A couple of things about Dawn's Early Light. It relies heavily on zone of control for rules of play. So one of the things you've got to do, as NATO especially, is you've got to have your units on the board in a way that sort of funnels the enemy into some very bad positions. The problem is that you usually don't have enough units to really get them to where you want to go, and so the Soviets can usually try to make some clever use of those weaknesses to exploit and break through. The Soviets have a big advantage in numbers, but the problem is that they're not very good quality. They take a lot of hits on defensive fire. You've got to be able to take some pretty big losses as the Soviets and keep going. When your plans fail, you've got to really think about what you want to do and adjust quickly, or you're just going to waste a whole bunch of guys. One of the things you might want to see is the pile of units that were destroyed or eliminated throughout the game, and I'll just show that to you now. I think you'll be quite surprised at how lethal the game was. If we look up here, you can see there's our big pile of the dead over here. Tons and tons of units, most of them Soviet. You can see in there there's a lot of blue. There's the entire 1st Panzer was wiped out. Pretty much all the West Germans were wiped out. American 1st, 2nd, and almost the 3rd Brigade was gone by the time the end of the game rolled around. There really just wasn't a lot to hold on to. One of the strategies you could try as NATO is to try to pull back as far as you can and try to meet your reinforcements halfway and then push back against the Soviets. That's a very risky prospect. The West Germans, you know, the best thing you can do here, and probably my mistake, was trying to do 2 things at once. You know, I was trying to stop the Soviets from exiting 9 units off the board, while at the same time defending Stahlhammer and trying to establish my line of reestablish a line of communication through Eisenbach. You can't really do all 3 things. You've got to decide where you want to lose and where you want to win in order to prevent the Soviets from gaining those 2 victory points. So my mistake, probably as the NATO player, was just trying to prevent any victory points from being scored by the Soviets. And that's a really tough act to try. Anyway, Corps Command, Dawn's Early Light, great game. If you haven't tried it yet, give it a shot. It's really, I think, one of the more underrated gems. It's an excellent game, plays nicely. You can play it in an afternoon. You can play it solo. It works that way very well solo. There's a lot of tension built into the scenarios. And there's a lot of different units, and the way that certain ideas like assets like artillery and air are handled are really simple and really nice. So I recommend it if you've got a desire for something that's brigade or you know, at the divisional regimental kind of level. Then you probably enjoy Dawn's Early Light. It's a fun, fast-flowing, not very complex, but a very nicely designed game. Thanks very much for watching this video, and if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comments, and I'd be happy to hear from you. Thank you.